We were told hydrogen doesn't work. Too expensive, too complex, too early. And if you've been following this space for more than a year, you've probably seen the headlines. Projects canceled, timelines pushed, billions written off. The narrative writes itself. But here's the thing. That narrative, it's incomplete. Because right now, not in 2030, not in some theoretical future, some green hydrogen projects are already working. They're running, producing, selling quietly, and nobody's talking about them. Because they don't need headlines to survive. So the question isn't, does hydrogen work? We need to stop asking that question. It's the wrong one. What did these projects do differently? That's what we're going to answer today. And by the end of this video, you'll see exactly why most hydrogen projects fail before they're even built, and what the ones that survive actually have in common. Let's start with what's actually true. When people say hydrogen doesn't work, they're usually referring to one of three things, and they're mixing all three together as if they're the same. The first group, projects that failed. These are projects that got built, operated for a while, and then stopped. Economics didn't hold. Demand wasn't there. The technology underperformed. These are real failures, and they matter. The second group, projects that never reached FID. FID, final investment decision, is the point where money actually commits. A project that never reaches FID isn't a failure. It's a project that was filtered out before it could fail. That's actually the system working correctly. The third group, projects that are actually operating. This group is small, but it exists, and it's growing. The problem is that all three groups get collapsed into the same headline. Hydrogen project abandoned. Hydrogen plant delayed. Hydrogen company misses targets. It all sounds like one story, but it's not. The projects in that third group, they didn't make the news. They didn't get the funding announcements or the splashy press releases. They just got built. And then they started running. So what makes them different? That's the real investigation. And once you see it, the rest of the industry starts to make sense. Seed truly knows how to finance. Here's what all of these have in common. They didn't create demand. They plugged into demand that already existed. That one insight explains more about project success than almost anything else in this space. Not the technology, not the policy environment, not the electrolyzer cost curve. The question that separates winners from losers is this: is there a real user with a real need who is committed to taking this hydrogen before the plant is built? If yes, you might have a project. If no, you don't have a project. You have a hope. Compare that to the projects trying to build export markets from scratch. New infrastructure, new customers, new logistics chains, new regulatory frameworks in countries that haven't yet committed to importing hydrogen at scale. Everything has to work at once, and it has to work before a single kilogram of hydrogen has been sold. That's where most of them break, not because hydrogen failed, because the system never showed up. If you've watched previous videos on this channel, you'll recognize this framework. We've talked about it before. But this time, we're not using it to diagnose failure. We're using it to explain success, power, offtake, utilization, financing. Every hydrogen project that actually works gets all four of these right. Not three, all four. The cost of electricity is the largest single variable in green hydrogen economics. Everyone knows this. What fewer people talk about is the structure of the power supply and not just the price. Projects that work are connected to either dedicated renewables, a solar or wind farm built specifically to power the electrolyzer, or they have long-term stable grid contracts that give them visibility on power costs for 10, 15, 20 years. What they don't have is hope-based power. Hope-based power is when a project model assumes that electricity will be cheap enough, often enough to make the economics work, without a contractual basis for that assumption. The numbers look good. The model is optimistic. But there's no binding contract that actually delivers power at that price. When power prices move, and they do, hope-based projects collapse. The ones that survive had already locked in their power before they locked in their investment. The demand side might be the single most important variable of all. Projects that work have real offtake. That means a customer, a specific named industrial user, who has signed a long-term contract to purchase the hydrogen. Not an MOU, not a letter of intent, not a strategic partnership announcement. A contract, with a volume, with a price, with a duration. When that contract exists before FID, everything changes. The project has a revenue model that a bank can underwrite. The construction timeline has a reason to be met. The customer has skin in the game. When it doesn't exist, the project is building supply and hoping demand will materialize. Sometimes it does. More often it doesn't. Or it does, but at a price that doesn't support the project economics. Utilization is technical, but it matters enormously. Electrolyzers, the machines that make green hydrogen by splitting water using electricity, are expensive capital equipment. Like any capital equipment, they need to run as much as possible to justify their cost. The utilization rate is the percentage of time the electrolyzer is actually running. If it runs 50% of the time, your capital cost per kilogram of hydrogen is roughly double what it would be if it ran 90% of the time. Projects that work are designed for high runtime. They're not dependent on intermittent renewable power alone. They have backup supply or a grid connection or configuration that allows them to run steadily rather than cycling up and down with the wind. Projects that fail often get this backwards. They model utilization at an optimistic 70%, 80%, even 90%. And then the reality of intermittent power, grid constraints, and maintenance cycles brings that number down to 30%, 40%. The economics fall apart. The ones that survive designed the system around a realistic utilization target from day one, and then built everything else around that constraint. Bankers are not idealists, and that's exactly why financing matters. A project that can be financed is a project with bankable cash flows, predictable contractual revenue streams that a lender can model, long-term offtake agreements, stable power contracts, a technology stack with a proven track record. Projects that get built are projects where the financial model works under a conservative set of assumptions. Not under the best case, not under the average case, but under the scenario where things go reasonably wrong. That's what bankable means in practice. Many of the projects that never reached FID had financial models that only worked under optimistic assumptions. Strip away the subsidies, raise the power price by 20%, lower the utilization rate by 15 percentage points, and the numbers collapse. The ones that got built were the ones where you could stress test the model and it still worked. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. The projects that work, the ones running right now, producing hydrogen, serving real customers, didn't start with hydrogen. They started with the system. What does that mean? It means the founders, developers, or project teams didn't begin by asking, how do we build a green hydrogen plant? They began by asking, what does this system actually need? What does the industrial customer need? What does the power grid look like? What can financing realistically support? And then they designed a hydrogen project that fit the answers to those questions. That's a completely different starting point from the majority of projects that never got built. Most projects start with the technology, an electrolyzer specification, a production volume target, a vision of what the finished plant looks like, and then try to retrofit the commercial structure around it. You can't build a bankable project backwards. You have to start from the customer, from the power, from the finance, and let those constraints shape the technical design. The projects that work understood this. The ones that failed didn't. Here's a test we apply to every project at Renee Energy. We call it the system stress test. It's simple. You take the project model and you ask 3 questions. If power prices rise by 30%, does the project survive? If the answer depends on power prices staying at today's level or lower, the project is fragile. What happens when gas prices move? When grid constraints increase curtailment costs? When a renewable energy contract comes up for renewal at a higher rate? A robust project has either hedged its power cost or it has enough margin in the model to absorb a significant move. If utilization drops by 20 percentage points, does the project survive? Most project models are sensitive to this. A small change in how often the electrolyzer runs has a large effect on cost per kilogram. If the model only works at 80% utilization and reality delivers 60%, the project is in trouble. Strong projects are designed to remain viable even at conservative utilization assumptions. If subsidies weaken or disappear, does the project survive? This one is uncomfortable, but it's essential. Many of the projects being developed today are explicitly dependent on subsidy support. Whether that's the US hydrogen production tax credit, European clean hydrogen mechanisms, or national grant programs. Subsidies are real, they matter. They can make projects viable that otherwise wouldn't be. But governments change, policy windows close, budget priorities shift. A project that only survives with full subsidy support is a project that is one policy cycle away from being non-viable. The projects that get built and stay operating tend to be the ones that pass all three tests. Not because they are perfect, they're not, but because they were designed with enough margin to survive conditions that are worse than expected. Only a small number of current projects can honestly say they pass all three. Those are the ones worth watching. So the question now isn't whether hydrogen will grow. It will. The question is, which projects survive long enough to scale? That's the only question that matters from here. And this exact framework, power, offtake, utilization, financing, is what separates the projects that get built from the ones that never move past a slide deck. If you want to understand how to actually structure hydrogen projects that get financed, not just announced, that's exactly what we break down inside H2 Hub by Renee Energy. It's where the frameworks we use in this channel go from concept to application. Links below. Take a look. LS, on financing structures that banks were willing to support. These are the projects that are running today. And here's what this means for the industry going forward. Not all hydrogen will scale. That's not pessimism, it's clarity. The market will continue to differentiate between projects that were built for the system and projects that were built for the presentation. The ones that were built for the system will attract the capital, the customers, and the policy support that allows them to grow. They'll become the reference cases that unlock the next generation of investment. The ones that weren't will continue to struggle. Some will pivot, some will fail. Some will be quietly written down on a balance sheet somewhere. This is not a bad thing for the industry. It's a necessary thing. The filtering is what makes the space credible. Green hydrogen has a real future, but it's a future that belongs specifically to the projects that were honest about the constraints from the beginning. Hydrogen isn't failing. The system is filtering. And the projects that survive this filter, they won't necessarily be the most technically advanced. They won't be the ones with the biggest ambitions, the largest press releases, or the most impressive renderings of what the finished facility will look like. They'll be the ones that were built for the system that actually exists. The real power cost, the real customer, the real utilization rate, the real financing market. That gap between the system that projects assumed and the system that actually exists is where almost every failed project lived. The winners closed that gap before they broke ground.